Similarly, a person can be a thief in essence without ever actually stealing anything, simply because he has never seen anything that he really wanted to steal. He only thinks about big money, which has never come his way, but given an opportunity worth his while, he would steal.
Right. And in a way, this is a much finer level of Russia, or much more refined level of Russia, but it's still a level of Russia. You know, the Baal Shem Tov famously says that if you want to know where the person stands, or where I stand, where we stand, then we have to look at our minds. Wherever our mind is, and I think we spoke about this, wherever our mind is, that's where we are, right? If I think of food all day long, that's the type of person I am. If I think of soccer all day long, that's the type of person I am. So where my mind is, that's where I am. So if I think of food all day long, does that mean I'm eating all day long? No, just thinking of food all day long, but it still turns me into the status of a food seeker, or food obsessed person. Obsessed, is there such a word as obsessor? No. Someone who's obsessed about food. Even though I'm not eating all day, I'm just thinking about it all day long. Same here. And that's the example that Rabbi Steinitz uses it. If I think of stealing all day long, might not be stealing, but I think of stealing. If I had the money, if I had the access, if I had the ability to steal, I would steal. Then that makes me a robber. Even though, again, I'm not actually stealing. It's a more refined category, because it's not judging us. It's not judging ourselves based on our actions, but it is judging ourselves based on our status, on our mind status. And that is where also the category of Russia applies, where our mind is, not always where our action is. And therefore, a person who wishes to do teshuvah, and really, by the way, this is the bucket that this is in. A person who wants to do teshuvah cannot just say, I'm going to change my action. Teshuvah means that I'm returning, right? That's what the word teshuvah means, not just repenting, but returning to my true self. If I'm really returning to my true self, to my divine self, it's not enough to change my action. I have to change my whole mindset. And if my whole mindset is not changed, then there's still a little Russia left in me. And I haven't completely returned. And that's why, again, this emphasis on where the mind is. I have to be able to change my mind, not just my actions, the thoughts of my mind, what my mind is preoccupied with. That's what really will eventually transform me.
Rabbi, I
Yes.
just want to qualify. If you
Yes.
didn't have any food, that's where your mind will be.
Right. I'm thinking of food because you're so hungry. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, but that's right. But again, you know, that was just an example. There's so many other examples we can think of. And it all goes back to idea number one that we spoke about, how we spend our time. You know, what are we going to be doing right now at this moment? Not just with our actions, but also with our time. Sometimes there is no action to fill the next hour. Okay, fine. So how's your mind going to spend this time? How's your heart going to spend this time? And that's really the ultimate question here that jumps from these thoughts. Let's continue on your bottom of 275, unless, of course, please, I encourage questions, comments, disagreements, whatever may come to mind.
Okay. Thus, distinguishing between a tzaddik and a rasha is no simple matter. In chapter 30, the author describes a person who sits and studies Torah day and night, never has a single sinful thought, yet in essence is a rasha. He is naturally frigid, so he has no negative desires. And on the other hand, he has a natural intellectual bent, so he enjoys studying Torah. He commits no transgressions, not because he overpowers his evil inclinations, but because he meets neither the temptation nor the opportunity to sin. Such a person is a rasha in essence, because he has done nothing to establish the sovereignty of his godly soul over his natural animal self.
Right. It's his inclination to study Torah. He does it because it feels good. Does he include God in the picture? Is he studying Torah because of the mitzvah that it is? Is he studying Torah really to refine himself? Is he studying Torah in order to be a better person and then better the world altogether? No. He's studying Torah because it's his natural inclination. Some people have a natural inclination to study. Some people have a natural inclination to even sit all day long. That's easy for them. Some people, in Yiddish, they call it Sitzfleisch. They don't have the zitzfleisch to sit all day long. But some people, that's their natural inclination. So does that mean that he's a tzaddik? Not at all. Because again, at the end of the day, he's doing it for himself. God is not even included in this picture. He's not following God's calling. He's following his inclination's calling. And that doesn't refine you as a person. That leaves you with yourself, with your ego. It has no iota of God in the picture. And therefore, a person who might be studying Torah all day long doesn't mean that he's a tzaddik. He could very well be, in essence, a rasha, because he doesn't include God in the picture at all. I know it's a very harsh statement, but on the other hand, it's a very truthful statement. What is a tzaddik? Someone who becomes one with God. Here, God is not even in the picture. So yes, you're studying Torah, good for you, but you're not doing it for you. You know, in many ways, we see that with Abraham. Abraham is, it's a very harsh statement by God, very powerful statement by God. But as we all know, Abraham, we read this on Rosh Hashanah. Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son Yitzchak, the only son he had, with Sarah, the son with whom God promised he will have descendants upon descendants that will be as numerous as the stars of the heavens. And here, before Yitzchak is even married and is able to give birth to children, he's asked to sacrifice Yitzchak, throwing the promise down the drain. Abraham doesn't waste time. We know the story. He wakes up early in the morning and he goes to fulfill God's commandment. And eventually they walk for 3 days. He finds the mountain, which is the mountain on which the Jerusalem temple was built, which is just behind the Western Wall today. He finds that mountain on which he needs to sacrifice his son. He prepares everything. And then at the very last moment, as Yitzchak is already bound on the altar, an angel comes and says to Abraham, Abraham, Al taslo me'uma, don't do anything to this child. You passed the test. And then the verse says as follows. God says to him, now that I saw your dedication to me, ki ataya dati, ki kimata. Now I know that you are God-fearing. Now I know. So the commentaries ask, what do you mean? Now you know? You had 9 tests for Abraham before that. Only now, on the 10th test, you know that Abraham is God-fearing? And the answer is as follows. All the previous tests were aligned with Abraham's inclinations. Abraham was a man of kindness. So for him to welcome guests, which was one of the tests, even though he was very sick, was aligned with him. That's who he was. He was a man of kindness. It was his nature. Here, in this 10th test, Abraham was asked to go against his own nature. He was a man of kindness, and he had to do the opposite of kindness, to kill his own son. When God sees that he's able to go against his nature for God, then God says, oh, atayadati, now I know ki irelo kimata. Now I know that you're God-fearing. Now I know that you're really in it for me. Not just because it's your nature, not just for you. You're in it for God. You really care about me. Now I know that you're God-fearing. It's specifically when we're able to go against our nature that, in order to fulfill God's desire, of course, that makes us tzaddikim, makes us righteous, makes us divine, not just in essence, but in being. Because in many ways, sometimes we do things and it's just our nature. So we're not doing it for God. And therefore, it doesn't refine us. It doesn't elevate us. We might just be a rasha, just like that person studying Torah all day long. But when we go against our nature and we do things for God himself, even though it's hard for us, that's when God says, oh, now I know that you're God-fearing. Now I know that we're in this together. And in many ways, I think that's why, just to put this in a practical, to translate this into a practical realm, I think that's why it's important every day to do at least one act that goes against our nature. Yes, you don't want to wake up in the morning to go and pray, so you wake up and you pray. Because even though it's against your nature, you like to sleep. You don't want to interact with this person and help them or even smile at them because it's against your nature. Well, do it. Because it's those acts that really refine us. And it's those acts that elevate us from the status of rasha to the status of tzaddik. It's like the story I may have told about Rabbi Naftali of Ropshitz, who was one of the great Hasidic masters of 200 years ago. He was also very wealthy. And he would give a lot of money to charity. And there was this person, this poor person, who told the story of how he would go every year to to ask for this specific sum of money for tzedakah from Rabbi Naftali of Ropshitz. And 1 year, he came to Rabbi Naftali. Rabbi Naftali gave him exact same sum he would give him every year. And once he says goodbye and thank you, he leaves the home of Rabbi Naftali. And after a few minutes, he hears someone running after him. He turns around and he sees that it's Rabbi Naftali running after him. So he says, Rabbi Naftali, why are you running after me? He says, I want to give you yet another bag of coins. He said, but you already gave me a bag of coins. I already got my annual tzedakah from you. Rabbi Naftali says, no, you don't understand. When you came to my office and I gave you that bag, the first bag of coins, I gave that first bag of coins because I saw you, I saw your torn clothes, I heard your story, and I pained for you. So I just gave you this bag of coin out of pure compassion. Now I want to do the mitzvah of tzedakah. Now I want to do it for God, not just because of my personal feelings or my conscience. So he has another bag of coins so that I can fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah. And in many ways, this is exactly what we're speaking about here. You know, to do things that go along with our natural inclination, that's easy, but that doesn't transform us. What really elevates us to the point of a tzaddik is doing things even though we don't want to. That's hard, but that's really what welcomes God into the picture. And not only refines us, but makes us also those righteous people, those Beinonis at least, that we are meant to be. Anyway, this is what this is saying. Again, I welcome comments or anything. Otherwise, we can continue a little more. But please, speak your minds. Shouldn't be monologuing. Okay, let's continue then.
Rabbi,
Yes,
I
please,
would,
William.
I would have one comment to make.
Yes.
I find that a person who is a Torah scholar and behaves like a Rasha, I find it so inconsistent. I don't understand how a person who is a Torah scholar could behave and say things like a Rasha. And I've seen so many examples of that over the last few years, including while I was in Israel. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about the chief rabbi, the Sephardic rabbi, comments made that are totally unacceptable. And I can't understand how, you know, if we talk about behaving like a Haron, bringing Jews together, learning from the Torah, how a Torah scholar could behave in such ways. Right. I cannot understand that.
Yeah, neither could I. Neither could I. All I can say is that I'm going back exactly to what we just studied here. That being a Torah scholar doesn't make you righteous. It doesn't. You could be a Rasha and be a Torah scholar, like we just said. Being a Torah scholar is very misleading. I don't think Torah scholars should be called Torah scholars because they don't really represent the Torah if they behave in such ways. So it could be very misleading, but that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point that Tanya is making here. That maybe they Torah scholars because it's their natural instinct. So they don't care about God, and therefore they don't really care about what God has to say about bringing people closer and loving your fellows, yourself, and so on and so forth, because they're learning Torah to satisfy the intellectual inclination. Doesn't have much to do with God, but that's exactly the point. You could have, you know, someone who's as religious as it gets, and as learned as it gets, and yet he's a complete Rasha. It's harsh, but that's the truth. That's what the Tanya says. What's the difference? The difference is whether you welcome God into it and you are following what God's calling is, or it's all about you. You know, there's this terrible story about, but it just emphasizes this point about this man who was also all about himself. He was supposedly, you know, religious, quote unquote. But he once had a poor person knock on his door. I don't think it's a true story, but it's just a story that emphasizes this point. And of course, he didn't want to give him tzedakah. Doesn't want to give him tzedakah, but he's a religious man, so he has to. So he goes to his garbage bin and he gives him the leftover fish that he had that day. This man now becomes very sick. This poor person had to eat it. He was very poor. He was starving. So he eats the leftover fish. He becomes very sick. This wealthy man, or this religious, quote unquote, religious man, hears that, oh, this poor person is sick. He says, great, I did the mitzvah of tzedakah, and I can do another mitzvah, visiting the sick. So he goes and visits the sick. Unfortunately, after he visited the sick, he heard that the person died. He was so sick from that piece of fish. So he said, oh, that's great. I can fulfill yet another mitzvah. And that is go to his funeral. Anyway, he goes to his funeral, fulfills that other mitzvah. He feels so good about himself. And then, of course, the family of this man is now sitting shiva. So he says, oh, I can fulfill another mitzvah. I'm going to go this evening and visit his family and comfort them. There's another mitzvah. And he goes home that night with a big smile on his face. And his wife says to him, why are you so happy? He says, well, it's not every day that I get to fulfill 4 of the most important mitzvahs: giving tzedakah, visiting the sick, going to a funeral, and comforting the mourners. All the while not realizing that, of course, he caused all of this, but he's so egotistic and so self-absorbed and so wicked, Rasha, that he doesn't realize that God was completely kicked out of that picture. Not just left out, but kicked out of that picture. So you could be most religious, thinking that you're doing mitzvahs, but you're a Rasha. Now, how do you change that? How do you transform that? By going to the very depth, not just changing your actions again, by going to your very own status. Am I including God right now in this moment? Or am I just doing this for me because it feels good? That's the ultimate question, really. Okay, let's continue. 276. It is said
that one who sits and commits no sin has in effect performed a mitzvah. Because the Torah includes 365 prohibitions, most of which the vast majority of people do not commit day after day. Everyone ought to be credited with countless mitzvot in their lifetime. However, the author explains the statement as referring not to just any sin, but only to a sin for which one has both opportunity and temptation. For instance, one of the 365 prohibitions is the commandment that the chosen jeweled breastplate worn by the Kohen Gadol, or high priest when he served in the temple, shall not move away from the ephod, the apron, one of the priestly garments. The Torah is commanding us to make sure that the chosen should not budge from its assigned place atop another of the priestly garments. Many of us have never committed this sin, and even many wicked people have never even considered doing so. There are also sins for which one has ample opportunity, but virtually no temptation, and vice versa. Normal people do not have to overcome a temptation to put on tefillin on Shabbat, and therefore do not receive a reward for refraining from succumbing to such a temptation. Likewise, many people are quite prepared to gossip, but have no one to gossip with. Such people refrain from the sin of lashon hara, slander, not because they overcome their evil inclination, but because they lack an appropriate audience.
Right, let's just summarize here. To summarize, go for it.
Summarize, one might transgress only the most lenient of prohibitions and always repent properly, or might in fact never actually transgress. Yet to be a Rasha, because the alignment of forces within his soul is such that he is predisposed to transgress the divine will.
Right. So it is true that if you sit in your cocoon all day long, you're not going to transgress any transgressions because you're all divorced from society. So many of the possible transgressions that you may have transgressed, you won't transgress because you're not with society. You're not gossiping, for example, like the examples he brought. But that doesn't make you a tzaddik. Again, what makes you a tzaddik, what makes you refined and a righteous person is specifically being engaged in the world and yet staying above it, staying there or being engaged in the world and reminding yourself that as engaged as you are with this world, you are but God's agent in this world. That's what makes the big difference. Because it's easy. And I think, by the way, if we have to speak about Judaism as a whole, I think that's what makes Judaism so special. We're not like Buddhism, for example, and there's many other religions that seeks to divorce a person from society. We're not Tibetan monks that meditate all day long in mountains and in deserts. We're not divorced. We're not monks that don't get married or Catholic priests that don't get married. Judaism forces us to engage in this world, to get married, to pay bills, to be in society, to go out and work. Yes, that's what Judaism tells us to do. But it tells us to do that so that we can influence this world as God's ambassadors, not be influenced by the world, be the influencers and not the influencees, so to speak. And the only way to really do that is to ask ourselves constantly, how can I be God's agent in this world, not my own ego's agent in this world? Not what feels good to me, what feels good to God. Or as we've said it before, not what's in it for me, what's in me for it, for God's general purpose. That's the ultimate question. And that's what really separates the Rasha, as we've defined him now, to the tzaddik, to the person that's righteous. And we should keep that question in mind really all day long, so that every moment of our day can be a moment in which we are welcoming God into the picture and following his calling, whether that calling suits us or not. All right, friends, we'll have to end here, but it's always a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. Shavua Tov should be a good week filled with good news, especially from the Holy Land. Hashem should really make our nation victorious over all these forces of evil and bring about the Mashiach. It's about time.
Amen.